Hi everybody, and welcome to today's webinar where we think about metacognition and deliberate teacher modelling. My name's Sarah and I'm a Principal School Development Lead at our Curriculum Plus. Before that, I was an experienced English teacher. I've been teaching for over 17 years, also head of department, and I'm just putting the finishing touches right now to my PhD in metacognition that I've done looking at applying some of the practical strategies I'm going to be talking about today in the classroom. And I'm really excited about being able to share these with you today. So just as we get started, can you in the chat introduce yourself and tell me how confident you feel about using metacognitive strategies in the classroom? And I'd like you to rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1, I know nothing about metacognition, and 5, I feel really confident and I could probably take this webinar for you, Sarah. Okay. So as you're all doing that, I just want to talk you through today's agenda. So we'll begin with a brief overview of metacognition and cognitive science to give you an idea about what a metacognition actually is. Then we'll touch on memory and managing cognitive load, so we can think about where we're modelling, where we're really placing the attention on our students. We'll then move into the deliberate teacher modelling, which is the meat of this session really. And then at the end, I'm going to take some time to talk a little bit about our educational research project that we're currently recruiting for with the EEF. Okay. Wow, from India. Welcome, Pooja. Great to see from you. 3 to 4, so reasonably confident. That's great. Okay. And I can see from the chat that confidence is between about 2, 3, 4, 3 or 4. Okay, 4 is good. That's great. It'd be interesting to have you contribute as we go through this session and to think about some of the strategies that you're using as well. And hopefully by the end of the session, we've moved you up at least 1 space, so from a 4 to a 5, from a 2 to a 3, and you've got some really practical strategies that you can take away in the classroom. Okay, so before we begin, I'm just going to explain very briefly a little bit about ARC and who we are. So I work with English Mastery. So we launched in ARC schools in 2014 as a curriculum programme. And we have a focus on designing and launching an English curriculum that offers an assessment framework, PD, and a fully resourced curriculum. Now we work in over 200 schools across the country, helping them support their curriculum. And as you'll see today, our curriculum is really heavily focused not only on knowledge, but also on the latest research in terms of metacognition and cognition as well. Okay. And in 2019, we ran a control trial with the EF, and we're now running a new trial based on the positive results that we've had so far with English Mastery. Okay, English Mastery is part of ARC Curriculum Plus Partnership. We grew out of ARC and we're one of the highest performing multi-academy trusts in the UK. Our programmes are now used by over 600 people across the UK, including 15 maths, and we use English, maths and science. So that's tens of thousands of students that are working with us and getting the benefit of our support. So this really is our mission. Okay, this is what we're passionate about at ARC, helping children and young people. They're at the centre of absolutely everything we do. You know, our team is research-informed curriculum designers, and we're expert learners. We're all former or current teachers who, like you, really want to assure success in English for all our students, regardless of their starting places, offering them, you know, real challenge and opportunity to progress. And our research is heavily influenced by research for cognitive science and how it can be deployed in the classroom to drive student attainment. So let's start with metacognition. I'll just give you 30 seconds to read through that quotation. So this is taken from the latest guidance from the EEF, or the Educational Endowment Foundation, about cognitive science. Now, interestingly, the ES guidance notes that studies of applied cognitive science, and by that we simply mean cognitive science that's actually used in the classroom rather than in a lab-based setting, can have mixed results. And that's because of the way it's implemented. Okay, I know for example, that when dual coding first was big, I just thought in my classroom that if I put a couple of pictures on a PowerPoint slide, then I'd absolutely nail dual coding, because I didn't really understand it, and therefore it wasn't really having much of an impact in the classroom. So today is going to be about unpicking that approach in a little bit more detail so that we can really understand some of the theory and, more importantly, how we can use that effectively in our classroom. So you'll notice today that throughout the session, we'll be drawing on research from the EEF guidance report on metacognition and self-regulated learning, as well as their review of cognitive science in the classroom. For anybody that hasn't read these reports, I'd really recommend them as a solid evidence explorations of how you can theoretically apply metacognition and cognitive strategies in the classroom. They're only about 40 pages long, so, you know, as time-poor teachers, they're bite-sized, but what I really like about them is they're heavily research-based, and also they give you lots of tips and tricks, some of which I'll include today in how to develop your classroom practice to be more metacognitive. Okay, so first, what is cognitive science? There's a growing thirst in education to explore how cognitive science approaches can be applied in the classroom. Evidence suggests they boost student learning and cognitive understanding, but let's think about what it actually is. Well, first of all, it's a study of cognition, and by that I mean simply understanding, learning, memory, and the brain. Cognitive approaches in the classroom include spaced learning, managing cognitive load, retrieval practice, and dual coding. And you'll no doubt heard, trialed, or even used some of these in the classroom. In today's session, we're going to explore how metacognitive modelling can be used to help support students in the classroom through our understanding of cognitive science. So what is metacognition? Most people, when you ask what metacognition are, will refer to it as thinking about thinking. And it's often oversimplified as this. And that's understandable, because if we unpick the term, cognition is derived from the Latin, which means thinking about, thinking, and meta means thinking on about. So a literal translation of that is thinking about thinking. Personally, I didn't find that definition particularly helpful. I think it's a bit vague and it doesn't really help me in the classroom. How do I get my students to think about thinking? What does that mean? How do I think about thinking? Am I thinking about thinking now when I'm thinking about thinking? It didn't really help me. But then when I started doing my PhD and I started digging into the research a bit deeper, at the other end of the spectrum, we get definitions like this. Metacognition is individuals having information about their cognitive structure and being able to organise this structure. Again, that felt a little bit too complicated for me to unpick in a classroom. However, in reality, practical metacognition that we use in the classroom probably falls in between. What really revolutionised my understanding of metacognition personally as a practitioner and also as a researcher was working out that it's a process. So it's a process of planning, monitoring, and evaluating our own learning. And we're going to have a look in a minute at what that actually means in terms of the classroom. So to think about it, we set a task, you plan the task, you think about whether those strategies are working, and then you evaluate that. Okay, so that all sounds a little bit theoretical. So how does that work practically? Well, say, for example, you set your students a task to learn 15 spellings or 15 facts. I'm going to, for this purpose of this, I've set my year 7s to learn 15 spellings for next week. As a learner, the first thing I'm going to do if I'm metacognitive is plan that. So I'm going to think about strategies that have worked for me in the past. At primary school, we used look, write, cover, check, and that worked really well. And we've been doing a little bit of work in English as well about spaced learning and how we shouldn't cram the night before and how actually we should do some look right cover check, and then leave it for a day and then try again. So I do that for about 3 or 4 days. Now, at that point, a really important part of metacognition is monitoring. Are my strategies working? If I keep using look right cover check and spaced learning, by the end of the week, am I actually going to know my 15 spellings? Well, when I think about it and I do myself a little test, I got my friend to test me the spellings, I realised there were 3 words I was really struggling with. And I was also struggling on focusing. Unfortunately, I got a bit distracted by my phone whenever I was trying to learn it. So I remembered that in year 6, we'd learnt about mnemonics and how to do and how to learn letters and how to break down the spelling so that we remembered the different letters. And also chunking and using a timer. So what I did is I changed my strategy so that for 3 words, I made mnemonics for them. I chunked them down and I set myself 10 minutes a night where I wasn't allowed my phone and I focused on that. So in my spelling test, I got 14 out of 15, which isn't bad. But next time, what I've decided to do to help my learning to be metacognitive is I'm going to identify the tricky words first, and I'm going to create mnemonics for them so that I know that I've got those, that I can use them with spaced learning. And I'm also going to set aside some timed practice where I spend 5 minutes each night over 7 nights learning those so that I can improve. So in short, cognitive approaches aren't always taught effectively in the classroom. Cognitive science is a study of how we learn. It's about brain and the memory. Metacognition is an active process. It's one that we keep being involved in. It's planning, monitoring, and evaluating our learning. Okay, and as part of that, we need knowledge of ourselves as a learner, what works for us. We need an understanding of the task. What's the task set? Okay, and we also need an understanding of, of what works for us. Do we become distracted as well? So we need that idea of self-regulation and how we learn best. And also we need as well to have an array of strategies. So when I'm learning something, I need to think, which strategies can I use that I can really apply to this? Ones that have worked in the past, ones that I've tried in class. And if those strategies aren't working, what can I try next? Next, I'm going to have a little look at managing cognitive load. So this is a tweet from Dylan William a few years ago, where he said that cognitive load theory is the single most important thing that teachers need to know. And again, when I started researching, I knew a little bit about it, but I wasn't really sure about what it is. So I think before we start exploring teacher modelling in depth, it's really helpful for us to have an understanding of how the memory works, so we know how to manage students' cognitive load and focus attention where it will have the most impact during the modelling process. So to do that, we're going to have a brief look at how the memory works and why managing cognitive load is a really important part of metacognition and also of teacher modelling. So firstly, no need to put anything in the chat, although you're very welcome to. Reflect on a lesson that you've either taught, observed, or participated in recently. Can you think of examples where students begin to get overwhelmed with information? Where perhaps you're participating in their lesson and you're struggling to follow because you're following many things at once? I know particularly I did, especially when I started out teaching, I would overwhelm my students trying to cram as much memory, as much information in as possible. And I think with the pressure at GCSEs for students that are doing a terminal exam as well, we do try, sometimes it feels like we try and cram information into our students rather than being strategic about the amount of information we're giving them, and also where we're directing their focus so that they're learning and memorizing the important information rather than just having lots and lots of random pieces of information that they can't really apply in an exam situation. So before we move on, I'm going to demonstrate to you what it feels like as a student when your cognitive load is not managed for you. On the next slide, I'm going to give you my explanation of how the memory works, but I've made absolutely no effort to try and manage your cognitive load. While I'm doing it, I want you to think about how it feels to try and learn that information and how easy you found it to complete a retrieval task that you've done using this information. You are not allowed to make any notes while I am giving you the information. Okay, so as soon as you get onto the next slide, you can start reading. To try and make this a bit harder, I'm going to talk to you as you try and read this, so your brain is getting even more information inputted to it. I've used images because I've read a bit about dual coding and how pictures can help the memory, but are they really helping? Are they really relevant, or are they just another thing for you to try and process? I bet by now that your working memory is becoming overwhelmed. You may well be persevering and trying to read through the information and taking what I'm saying to you at the same time. But even without me speaking, it's a lot to take in. I wouldn't be surprised that by now, many of you are just really hoping that I'll shut up so that you can focus on this. But even if you do focus on this, how are you actually organising that information? I am going to be quiet now, and I'm going to give you another 10 seconds before we move on to the next slide. Okay, now I'm sure that we all have, from all that information on there, you could really, really detailed knowledge of how the memory works. What I'd like you to do is think about this, and it'd be really helpful if you put this in chat just to get some conversation going. So imagine I'd given you that information in class, and I'd talked to you, and I'd put some random kind of related images on there. If I asked you in 60 seconds to recreate that, how confident are you now if I said recreate a diagram of the brain that you could do that? In the chat, rate yourselves of 1 to 5. 5 being absolutely, Sarah, I could totally do that. And 1, I have absolutely no idea where to begin. And I want you to do it based only on the information that I've given you, not on any prior knowledge that you might have. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is, let's have a look. 2, 3, 3. I'm impressed, Jack. I don't know if I'd have got a 3 there. Okay, so that's good. 2, 3. It's 2. Yeah, it's quite overwhelming, isn't it? Especially when I was talking to you. And I know that one of the mistakes I make as a teacher was I would talk over a PowerPoint, and I didn't really. Yeah, exactly. My brain feels like a walnut by the end of the day, about that small. Thank you, Billy. Yeah, so I know I've made the mistake of talking while students are trying to read something, and it's really, really annoying. You don't know where to place it. Okay. So now I'm going to give you exactly the same information, but I'm going to try and optimize the information you get to manage your cognitive load. And again, I don't need to take any notes of this. I just want you to focus on what I'm saying. Okay. I'm going to when I can. Okay. So first of all, take 30 seconds to read the diagram. Don't try and draw it. I want you to be totally focused on what I'm saying to you. Okay, now I'm going to talk you through the diagram. Working memory only has limited capacity. For us to need to be able to remember information, we need to embed it into our long-term memory, which is on the right-hand side of that diagram, or it is on my screen. Before it reaches our long-term memory, it needs to go through several stages. So your brain is constantly being exposed to information. This is inputted as stimuli, as you can see on the left-hand side of the diagram. So for now, your stimuli that your brain's trying to work out is the sound of my voice. It's what's going on the screen. It could be the noise in the background. For instance, somebody's just walked past the back of this room here and I can hear that. It may be the other images that's on your desk, might be the smell of tea. All of this is going into your sensory memory right now. So obviously it's not all relevant to the task. So you focus your attention on the most important information. Now, hopefully this is the image on the screen and not my explanation, but I completely understand at this time of the day if it was your tea. And this information, this focused information, then where our attention is driven, then goes into the working memory. And most of the sensory memory is eventually forgotten. Now, as I've said at the start, unfortunately, working memory is really limited. And for information to go into the long-term memory, you need to focus on it and you need to rehearse it. For example, without making notes or using any retrieval strategies, would you be able to recreate this diagram accurately at the end of the webinar? Next week, next month, next year? If you could recreate this diagram at the end of next year with no structuring, no scaffolding at all, then it's truly in your long-term memory. So cognitive strategies such as retrieval, practice, and spaced learning can help us with this. However, because working memory is limited, it's important we don't try to overwhelm our students with information. And we can do this through managing their cognitive load to reduce distractions and to help them focus on what's important. And what I'm really hoping here is that from looking at that diagram and from listening to my explanation and my examples, is that you can see now how I've managed your cognitive load in order to help you understand. Now, I was going to make you do the diagram, but in the purpose of time, I won't. But what I would be interested in you doing is you completing the same task as I did before. So putting in chat how confident you feel from 1 to 5 about recreating that diagram. To help you, if you were doing it in my class, because it's the first time you've done it, I'm going to scaffold you. So think about, if you had that diagram in front of you, how confident would you feel about being able to recreate that diagram? Okay, it'd be interesting to see if, and now your cognitive load has been reduced, if you feel more confident in doing that. Okay, that's the answer. So I'm just going to talk through some of the strategies. So the first thing that I did was I reduced the input on the slide so you weren't getting all that information like you were on the first slide where you had, you didn't know whether to look at the pictures, you didn't know what to read. I optimized the information. So you got there exactly the same amount of information as you did on the slide where I explained it, apart from the picture of the desk and the brain. But what I did there was I carefully selected what I thought was important for you in the understanding of this context. I gave worked examples with step-by-step guides. And this really links to teacher modelling, because this is what we do. Okay, we give worked examples and we explain how that relates to you. So, for example, in the stimuli you could have been experiencing. I scaffolded the task so that you had the basic structure to support you. And I helped you, and that helped you manage your cognitive load. We're doing this again. I'd gradually fade out that support, so we'd repeat the exercise. I do it without giving you the grid. And then later on, we'd try it in a week. And then we keep doing that so that eventually, this time next year or in a month, you'd be able to completely rework that and explain to me in a different scenario how that worked. And then just when you thought you'd got the hang of it, I'd start to add more information to up the challenge. And that's what we do to our students in the classroom, isn't it? We scaffold, we support, we remove the scaffolding, we increase the challenge that we scaffold, and we remove that so students are getting a higher and higher levels of challenge. So in summary, working memory is easily overwhelmed. And we can use these cognitive strategies to help students manage the information they need to know. So for example, we can use that cognitive strategy of managing cognitive load. So you might be thinking there, that's great, Sarah, but how does that relate to teacher modelling? Because as a teacher, I need to be alert to, I need to manage the cognitive load for me and for my class. And that's really important. I need to think about where I'm modelling, where I'm placing that cognitive load. And also teacher modelling is a great way of reducing students' cognitive load. So they're taking in the information from you as an expert learner in order to develop that expertise themselves. So let's move now on to looking at the main focus of our session, which is deliberate teacher modelling. Again, just take a few seconds to reflect on this. I'll let you read through it and won't talk to you while you're reading it. Okay, I'm going to put my hand up here. Definitely had all three of those things happen to me. I know where you think you've explained something perfectly, and then you start something off and you go, Miss, how do I start it? Miss, what word should I use? Or they start it and they go, can you just come and check this is okay? If we can use modelling effectively as a way of giving our students the confidence and the self-efficacy, but also the right model so that when you ask them to start working independently, not only do they feel confident to do that without your support, but that they do it accurately. And again, we're going to have a look at that particular second one, because I think as teachers, we quite often assume that students have expertise that we don't. And in particularly in a curriculum area where sometimes we think, oh, well, they'll have learned that in another subject, or, there's not that curricular thing, particularly in terms of metacognition and cognition, where we assume maybe they understand how to revise when actually they don't. So one thing that's often underestimated, and this is, I'm a bit passionate about this because this is part of my PhD as well, is looking at the impact of test anxiety on students and how modelling can reduce that. So I think as teachers, sometimes because we're expert learners, we don't realise how much anxiety tackling a task or in a test situation can cause for our students. So just take 30 seconds to read through this and reflect on not knowing how to revise makes these two students feel. So their teachers seem to have overestimated Sammy and Gemma's tacit knowledge. As expert learners, we know how to revise. However, as novice learners, Sammy is unsure about how to do it, and it sounds as though both him and Jenna would benefit from some deliberate teacher modelling that shares this expertise. And I know I, for one, have been guilty. If I think right back to that spelling strategy at the right, I assume that my students will have those strategies and know those strategies. I think of, I always think with guilt about the amount of times I've sent students away to learn something or to revise something, and actually I've not shown them how to do it. And I'm sure my students have felt really similar to Sammy and to Gemma here, where they've gone, I wish you'd just tell me what to do. I know what to revise, but I don't really know how to revise. And I think with a little bit of expert modelling, I could have really supported them in doing that. So this is taken from the EEF guidance on metacognition. As skilled learners, we as teachers are expertly placed to share with students not only what they should learn, but how they should learn it. And I think, why I feel so passionate about modelling, because I know that for me, until I really started digging into metacognition, it was something that I wasn't doing often enough, or I'd do it, intermittently. And it wasn't until I made it a cornerstone of my practice that I felt that I really helped students. share my expertise so that they could foster that expertise and confidence as well, and hopefully take away some of the anxiety. If you know what to do and you know how to do it, then it makes sense you're going to feel less worried about it. So let's think about, first of all, what deliberate teacher modelling is. Okay, well, first of all, it's articulating your thought process to show students how to complete a task. So it's not just doing something, but it's talking through why you're doing it, making the implicit, what you're doing automatically without thinking, explicit to your students so they can understand. You do this by giving a really clear verbalized demonstration of the steps needed. You can use scaffolded tasks and works models to provide appropriate support and reduce cognitive load. Then as students become more confident, you fade away that support. Okay, and you may fade that away. So the first time that you do it, you might really explicitly model and write an example of paragraph in front of students on the board. And I know that feels a bit like putting yourself out there. But let's be honest, that's what we're asking our students to do, isn't it? Day in, day out, often in test situations. And I became more and more of the mindset that I'm not going to ask my students to do anything that I can't do it. If I can't write, a model paragraph, without being able to share that process, then how can I expect them to do it? So I might really explicitly model that, but then next time I might give them a model paragraph. I might give them part of the model paragraph. Quite often I'd model the first part of something, and then I'd ask them either paired or independently to do it, and then find by the end of it that actually by the end of that process, the students faded away that support. They don't need me to explain it anymore because they are now experts themselves and can actually explain it to other students. So let's think about the benefits of writing your own models. So there are benefits to you as a teacher, and there are benefits obviously to our students, which is why we're all here, isn't it? We all want to support our students. So first thing is, it really deepens your understanding of the text of the task. It's not until you actually try to do something that you realise those metacognitive stress and those strategies that we're using. So for example, if we're learning a new text, maybe we can have a go at writing an exam answer so that it really helps us understand, what's expected of our students. It helps us have a really clear understanding of where we're asking students to place their cognitive load. It makes it easier as well to identify that tacit knowledge that I was talking about, the knowledge that we take for granted, the things that we assume our students will know that maybe they don't initially. Okay? It clarifies my expectations for students. If they've seen me model a paragraph, if they've seen the standards that I have, they know the standards to expect from me. So what's in it for the student? Well, obviously, they get your expertise. As novice learners, they get to see how an expert approaches the task. And we all benefit from that. Some of the best things that I've had when I was starting out was actually being in a classroom and watching somebody teach and seeing how they'd done it and having those discussions with it afterwards. Because, if you just try and teach after teaching a textbook or looking at the theory, it's really on the verge of impossible, I would say. So students then develop an understanding of what good practice looks like more clearly than just applying a success criteria. You should be using apt quotations. You need to include, you need to refer to primary sources now. You need to show you're working in a maths equation. What does that actually mean? You're showing your students what it means so that they can actually do that. Finally, it can be used to scaffold their understanding in the way that I did with you, is to talk students through it, to show their understanding, and then obviously we remove that scaffolding so that students can work more effectively, independently. And finally, it reduces anxiety. If they know how to do something and we take away that myth, that fear factor, then it reduces that fear factor for our students. Okay. I suppose it wouldn't be a modelling session if I didn't model for you how I model, if that isn't a bit too metacognitive. So what I'm going to do in a minute is I'm going to model how I approach a deliberate teacher model in the classroom. In fact, I'm just going to pause there and let you read the task because you're going to be trying and doing that while I'm talking. Okay. Typical task that we happens across lots of different curriculum areas, lots of key stages where students have to argue a particular point of view, and sometimes they get to choose that, sometimes they don't. Quite often, as in this case, they learn the task. I'm going to teach this to you as if it was my year 7s. So I'm going to be in role as teacher for the next couple of minutes. But obviously, for the purpose of the webinar and time constraints, whenever I ask the class a question, I'm not going to open it up and expect you to answer it. I'm going to assume that they've answered, and then I'm going to incorporate that answer into my modelling, so you don't have to start, role-playing being class. Naturally, as teachers, before we even began doing that, we'd unpick the question, we'd start, questioning our students, making sure they understood the question, asking them why they knew that information. But I'm going to take this layer out of the task so that we can cut it out for you, because as expert learners, you'll know that, but also so that we can move to the real meat of the modelling. So just to clarify before I start, I'm going to really tightly focus this on a year 7 lesson. And I'm going to plan counter argument. Most students, we've done a lot of work on persuasive techniques, and naturally they're really good at talking about a for argument, but they don't really know how to use a counter argument. So before I start, I just want to give you the caveat. What I'm going to show you isn't rocket science. It isn't absolutely going to blow your mind. Okay, it isn't new. And the content for what I'm doing in terms of the ideas for the model are superficial. If you're an English teacher or a teacher anyway, you're not going to say, I'm not teaching you what the counter argument to the stress of examinations is good. The purpose of this is to model deliberate teacher practice so that we can then unpick, after I've done it, how and why I've approach this task in order to manage my thinking and my students' cognitive loads. They really, really understand what we're doing. Okay, so when we get to the next slide, I'm in role as teacher, the next couple of slides, and then I'll tell you at the end when I'm not in role, and then we'll start to unpick that process. Okay, sitting comfortably. Excellent. Okay, pens down, facing this way. So many of you, when you're tackling a task like this, particularly in a time situation, you'll want just to get on with it. Whenever I'm marking your work and I say, do a plan, you just get a really brief plan. I can really see how you want to get on with this task. I'd want to get on this task and not waste your time. But actually, what you're doing when you're doing this, and I'm finding when I'm marking your work, is I'm getting a one-sided answer. So I'm going to show you today how I would plan for this, so you can understand what a good plan will help you develop a really powerful argument, so that when you're writing this up next lesson, you can develop this into getting a much more sophisticated answer. Okay, so one last thing before we begin. You're going to close your books, and I want you to put your pens down. Yep, even you at the back, Nick Wallace. Pen down, facing that way. Yeah, I can see you. Yeah, putting your phone in your pocket. Thank you. Great. Focus on me. The reason I'm asking you to do that is I want you to really concentrate on what you're doing. Now, I know some of you are going to be worrying about trying to get this down. Don't worry. I'm going to do a photocopy of my work. I'm going to have it for you to stick in your books next lesson so you refer it to you. So I've done that for you. What I really need you to focus on this lesson is having a look at how to plan this and really understanding the thinking that goes in behind a really good plan. And don't think you're just going to get and sit there and not participate. I'm going to be asking you questions because this is something we're going to work on together as a class. So we're going to use my expertise and your ideas, and together we're going to put a really, really good plan together to help us create a really successful response to that exam question. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do, no picking up your pencil, thank you, is I've created a table and I've divided it into 3 different sections. So I've done this deliberately so that I can organize my ideas into 3 different areas. So first, we're going to have a look at the 4 arguments. So we're going to do that, and we're going to have a think about what arguments are there for for students having stress. So we're going to have a look in that one column. Then we're going to have a look at the against column. So we're going to argue against it. And when we get down to that column, we're going to have to think about why we argue against it. And then finally, we're going to look at some solutions. And again, when we come to those columns, I'm going to talk to you a bit more about that, because no doubt you sat there thinking, well, Mrs. Dowie, she's asking me to write an essay on why exam stress is good. Why on earth would I argue against it? So I'm going to show you today why that's important and how that makes you more of an expert. So first of all, I'm going to give you an example of an argument for stress being a good thing. So I'm going to argue, my argument is that it motivates some students, and it motivates you because it gives you focus. Okay, so that's my first idea. And you can see in here that I've not written really detailed notes. My notes need to make sense when I read them back, but actually I'm not writing an essay, and I'll have to do this quite quickly. So if we think of each idea as a bit like a topic sentence, so it needs to be relevant, it needs to answer the question, and it needs to focus on one thing. So we looked at topic sentences last term. So if we think of each of our ideas as a topic sentence, then that helps us focus our ideas. So let's have a think. What other reasons have we got then? You've looked at my idea for why stress is a good thing. Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. We can't avoid it. It's part of our everyday lives, isn't it? We don't just get stressed at school. Okay, we get stressed at home. We get, stressed. You go out into the wider world. Unfortunately, you're going to find something stressful. So we can't avoid it. So if we can't avoid it, then maybe we should get used to it. Just give me a second. I'll just write that down on the board. That's a great idea. Okay, so I'm going to put that other point of we're better learning how to control stress that you've made as a different point, because I think one idea is that we can't avoid stress. I think learning to control stress is a different idea. So I'm going to put that down as a different point. That's great. Let's just have one more idea here. Yep. It does. It builds resilience, doesn't it? If we get better at controlling stress, then we get better at developing, we get better at dealing with those situations. So why against? Why do I want to argue against that? Let's have a think. Firstly, what do we call it in an argument when we argue against? Yeah, that's right, counter argument. So let's just have a think before we do this. Why would I argue against stress being a good thing? What would the point of that be? Yeah, you're absolutely right. It does show a balanced argument. Okay, it shows a balanced argument. So that shows that I have an understanding of 2 sides, which is good. You're going to get more marks for that because it shows that you do it. But strategically, how can we use that to make our argument better? Yeah, absolutely. If we know what the other side of the argument is, then it helps us anticipate it so we can knock that argument down. And in a minute, I'm going to show you what I mean by that. We'll develop that in a little bit more detail. But first of all, again, I'm going to write down a topic sentence that explains an against point. Yeah, it can. So again, look at what I've done here. What does my against point do compared to my for point? Can we see any common vocabulary in there? Yeah, absolutely. Well done. Yeah, so it's the other side of the for argument, isn't it? So let's see if we can do that. Let's have a look at those other points and see if we can look at the for argument and then match our against argument against it. Okay. Yeah, it can negatively affect exam performance and our well-being. So I'm just going through this quickly. So solutions, why do we need a solution? We've argued for and against, we've got really good balanced arguments. We have totally anticipated what the other side of the argument is. So why do we have a solution? Yeah, it does develop our argument. It totally shows that we have a deeper understanding of it. Yeah. Okay, so it does. So what having a solution does, and the reason I'm including solutions here as well, is if we're arguing, some people are saying that it's a bad thing. If we can have a solution to that negative point, then it helps back up our positive point. Okay, so we're going to come up, what solutions can you have? If students are feeling stressed in school, let's quickly have a look through those solutions. Brilliant. Wrote those down super fast, didn't I? And we were really quick at putting them up there. So let's move on now to, we've got lots of ideas for how we can use our counter argument. Oops. So what I've done here is I've taken from each one idea from each. Why do you think I've taken one idea? Let's have a look at what I've done and have a look at that. Okay. So we can't afford it. So my argument is we can't avoid it. Okay, my argument against is, but it does affect exam performance. My solutions that we've got are, well, it's up to schools. Schools are perfectly placed to be able to teach students. So let's put this in a sentence. We're going to develop this again tomorrow, but let me show you how I would do that, how I would argue that. So some people might argue that stress of examinations is a really bad thing for students. And actually, students become so stressed that it negatively affects their exam performance, and they do really badly in exams, and that it's not great for students at all in order to be able to do that. However, let's pragmatically, what does pragmatically mean? Yeah, that's right, practically. Pragmatically, we can't avoid it. Stress is part of our everyday lives. So instead of focusing on the negative, let's look at how we can use it to positively motivate exam performance. And how we can do that is by, in schools, focusing on teaching how to cope. And then in there, we then develop, and that's what we're going to look at next. So we're going to have a look at some details and some ideas for how to do that. And then also, this is a really emotive subject. This is something that maybe people in the class and across the school are feeling. So then maybe I'll give them a little bit of advice as well to say, you know, if you are struggling with it, you know, even though we can't avoid it, and then give them some solutions about where we can go for help. Okay. Right, let's just end it here. As you can see, I could completely go on for that. We're running out of time. So I just want to spend a couple of minutes talking through the decisions I made in deliberate modelling to build up expertise. So ideally, I'd have done this with a visualizer on the board and explained and planning my explanations. So what I did was I explained why we were planning. I explained my expectation that they should be actively involved in the process. I told them I didn't want them to copy because I wanted their cognitive load to be focused on me and the explanations and not writing it down. I've made that mistake so many times, getting students to read as I'm writing on the board. They're just thinking about copying it down before you move on. They're not thinking about what you're saying, not fully anyway. I structured it into 3 columns because I wanted students to organise their ideas logically and separate the argument from the counter argument. I focused on 4 first because that's a natural response to focus on this, and that's okay. It's part of the process. Students should be doing this. And I wanted to explore the ideas and develop so that they could develop their ideas into paragraphs using topic sentences. Then I went to the against section. And I explained first why they were doing this, so they understood the rationale behind it. It was a more balanced and powerful argument. And also showed them how to match it. So we have a for and the against matches it. I recap vocabulary. And then I pushed the solutions and explained why it was important, and again used class ideas. I gave, at the first time, for each one of those, I gave an idea to model what I wanted, particularly for that first one, so they knew I was expecting topic sentences. And then in the next part, I highlighted the bits I wanted to look at to reduce cognitive load and to focus students on the part of the plan I wanted them to model. Okay. I appreciate, though, that it's modelling in front of a class but particularly in some, when you do it for the first time, can be really scary. And I hope what you take away from this is not the plan for persuasive, how a piece of persuasive writing should be structured. There are obviously lots of ways of doing it that suit your students, but how I modeled for the class what I was doing and why I was doing this. If students understand the process, you can fade that away. When I first started doing it, I felt really vulnerable about it. I felt really self-conscious. But as I started developing it, I became more and more confident. So that in the end, I wasn't even thinking about doing it. And there wasn't a class, there wasn't a lesson where I didn't have the visualizer or wasn't writing on the board and developing that expertise. So some do's and don'ts to help with this. Have your model pre-written if you're not sure. Have that draft answer. Have that structure of the paragraph. The more you do it, the less you'll need it, and eventually you'll just be doing it off the cuff. Include mistakes. Part of the metacognitive process is to learn from errors. You're an expert, but you're not perfect. Students shouldn't expect to see perfection. They'll learn more from you by seeing mistakes. I had quite often put deliberate mistakes in a spelling mistake or a word that I got wrong, asking students why that was wrong and what was more appropriate. Explain your thinking. Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this now? Why did I do the counter argument after I did the argument? Please, please, please don't get students to copy. Their attention is being misdirected, and don't allow them to be passive. Okay, so I did some quantitative research as part of my PhD, and I believe so much in what I was doing that I really made this a cornerstone of the work that I've done. And I'm just going to give you 30 seconds just to have a look. I asked students at the end of it, what was the most useful thing they learned, and what advice would they give to teachers? Okay, so it's not just me saying that. This is the information that I got from my class that talked about it and really found that useful. And that was one of the most powerful things with me, taking away that fear factor, was knowing that it actually worked. So just while we finish this this particular section, let's think about 6 techniques that you can take away today. So again, I'm just going to let you read through those. So maybe now that you've got all those 6, maybe take away one of those and say, I'm going to have a go at doing that in my classroom tomorrow. Okay, I'm going to think of a lesson I've got tomorrow. I'm going to practice one of those things. I'm going to see how it goes. So finally, in summary for this section, if you use this process, you can help teachers identify what students need to know to complete the task. It's that really clear, verbalized demonstration of the steps. And as you move from novice to expert, you can move that out. I wouldn't expect to be doing that model all the time. Very quickly, I'd expect students to be moved on, so that I gave them the grid, and then eventually I didn't give them the grid. And then I'm moving them on to writing it up. Okay, so that draws to a close this part of the session. Excuse me, I've done a metacognition, managing our students' cognitive load, and deliberate teacher modelling. If you put any questions in the chat, and I'll stay on at the end of the session. I realise we're coming towards the end of the session, but I'm happy to stay on afterwards to answer any questions that we might have about either the research trial or any of the modelling that our cognitive load that we've talked about today. So I'm going to speak now a little bit about a project we're running with the EEF, which, as you know, as mentioned from the start of this session, are the Educational Endowment Foundation that do a lot of the evidence-based research that schools use nowadays and is really useful. So we're inviting schools to join the English Mastery Programme for a trial we're running with the EEF. We're really excited about being able to do that. So first, I'll begin by explaining a little bit about what English Mastery is. So we're a complete curriculum framework. We offer a fully resourced Key Stage 3 curriculum with lessons guidance and resources. We're more than that though. We offer a full PD package and training in how to effectively implement the program in your own context as well. So you get a really detailed knowledge-based curriculum. We give you the guidance for your implementation, and we also give you comprehensive curriculum standardization materials. And that's really useful because it doesn't just show you how your students are performing against a class within your school. We have thousands and thousands of students doing assessments across the whole country, and we do standardization within them, so you can get a really clear idea of how your students are performing against others, but also what other students are doing and how they're developing their knowledge and their expertise. So the EEF trial, the original trial, was done in 2019. We launched in the ARC schools and there was lots of success, so EEF wanted to run a research trial on the programme. Unfortunately, it was halted because of COVID. But although we couldn't have the quantitative report, and by that I mean we couldn't get the facts and figures about attainments, because students weren't sitting some of those assessments, we did still get some data from teachers, and there is a report around that came out in April that's got lots of really great feedback about English mastery. So you can see there that the amount of teachers that have found that English mastery has really benefited, that knowledge-rich approach, that the cognitive learning that we put into this program has really helped their students, and they've reaped the benefits from it. This is one of the teachers talked about that idea of retrieval practice and cognitive practice that I've just been talking about. You can see from today's session that we really weave findings from cognitive science throughout our curriculum, so students not only experience a high quality, knowledge-rich curriculum, but they can also retain and retrieve it. Students need to be able to retain that knowledge. They need to be able to use it not only in GCSEs, but to have that really rich knowledge as they go through life. So I thought it was great, this 89% of teachers thought that our literary heritage standard was quite or very effective. And the same for writing mastery. That's some really, really powerful data that comes not from me standing over them going, what did you think about literary heritage? Pen in hand. That was some data that was collected by the EEF, by an independent evaluator. And that was the feedback that we got on our programme, which again is one of the reasons we're redoing the trial, because the feedback that we received was so positive in terms of the impact it was having on students and the difference that it was making. So again, part of what we do is about personal development, but the way we teach grammar is drawn from the findings of cognitive science, repeated practice, managing students' cognitive load and bridging that knowing doing that. And you can see here, I know when I first started, my knowledge of grammar wasn't as great as it should be. So I've completely developed my understanding of grammar, but also my students' understanding of grammar as well, so that we've got a really clear, articulation. The students can really clearly articulate themselves in their writing. Okay. So we offer bespoke training to help it suit your school in your context. This isn't a blanket one size fits all. This is about taking a curriculum and making it work for your school, your students, your class, your teachers. Okay. So part of my job is to go into schools and to help support them with the EEF trial. And I really love going in those schools and working with them, to help between us, work out how to develop students. And one of the things I've loved doing it from the first rollout that we've had of that this year from our first cohort is seeing already the impact that it's having on Year 7 students whose knowledge is so much richer, but while fluently using vocabulary, who are losing higher level vocabulary, and how the challenges really increase for those students. It helps reduce marking. As a teacher, 17 years, this is something I can really relate to. All those times where I spent putting, not necessarily dual coded, but pictures on a PowerPoint, and that's not where the intellectual leverage is. Okay. As a teacher, I want to spend my time thinking about how to help my students in a lesson, thinking about how to entertain, how to help entertainment, thinking about that, writing their models, okay, not putting together resources. Okay, I can adapt the resources, I can change the resources, I can tweak them to meet the needs of my students, but what I really want to be doing is actually using my teacher time to support my students. So our team are research, information, curriculum designers, and we have expert trainers for all current teachers who, like you, they really want to ensure success in English for all Key Stage 2 students, regardless of their starting places. So finally, a little bit about the trial. So the EEF are funding a 2-year randomised control trial. I'd like to explain for those of you that don't know what a randomised control trial, what that is in a minute. So the purpose of it is to assess the impact of a knowledge-rich curriculum for next year. So this is September's Year 7 cohort. And it'll look also at how a centralised curricula can contribute to teacher workload. Which I think, you know, at the moment particularly is really prescient. How we can support students, but also how we can support teachers. So a randomised control trial means that so for all the schools that take part, they're divided into 2 groups. So we have a treatment group and a control group, and that isn't done by us. Sheffield Hallam do that, and it's all done automatically, so that it's completely random. So half the schools go into the treatment group, and what that means is that you will follow the English Mastery programme for 2 years. The trial will evaluate the impact of the programme over 2 years. So look at the baseline, look at your students at the end of year 8 to see the progress they've made. You'll need to pay £900 a year to participate in the trial, but the EF have heavily subsidised that, and that's a saving of over 80% on the English Mastery programme. So there's a significant saving in that. Also, although it's for year 7 up to year 8, you will be able to access the whole Key Stage 3 programme. So we'll only be measuring the impact in your 7s in year 7 and as they go up to year 8. But say if you've got a year 8 and year 9 class, you could absolutely use our curriculum. So you can use Jane Eyre, you can use Small Island, you can use Animal Farm, you can use The Tempest. You can have all of those resources as well as one of the benefits of being selected for the trial. The other 50% of schools go into a control group. So you'll be randomly allocated to that group, and it's just business as usual for you. You do whatever you would normally do for your year 7s and 8s. As a control group, you are just as important to our research as the groups that are taking part in the trial. In fact, we couldn't do it without you, literally couldn't do it without you. So as a thank you for that, you will receive £1,250 on completion of sharing your data with us. And that is data that you just generate anyway. You don't have to do anything different in terms of that. And obviously, you know, we go through parental consent and it's all done ethically, but it's really playing a valuable part. So in a way, it's a bit of a win-win situation. You're either part of the treatment group and you get to benefit English Mastery, or you get £1,250 for free. So it's a great opportunity for all schools. So to be eligible, you need to be an English state school, non-selective, a year 7 cohort starting this September that would roll up into 2024. And we say that in case of some middle schools that just have year 7. You can't have delivered English Mastery in the past. And unfortunately, special schools can't have the trial. If you've got any questions about the trial or the research, we'll be sending information about today's session, so everything about metacognition and about modelling and how to participate in the trial after this session. So I'm going to stay on for a few minutes. Really sorry I've gone over. I just get very, very passionate when I talk about metacognition and modelling. If you want to stay in at the end, if you've got any questions, please do stay. And please feel free to contact us about the English Mastery Trial. Either email us there or use a QR code to book a call. Thank you.